We acknowledge the Ancient Ones, the Greater Shamanic Council of Light, Hermes, Thoth, Trismegistus, and Seshet, Lady of the Measuring Cord, as above, so below, as within, so without. We acknowledge Imhotep, architect of the cosmos. May the earth be the mirror of heaven. We acknowledge the sacred order of the Magi, and all throughout history who knew, like now, a turning of the ages. We acknowledge the master builders of Göbekli Tepe and the great shining ones at Kallanish. The courage and knowledge of the Polynesian wayfinders traversing the great oceans. We acknowledge the prophetic traditions of Ezekiel and Daniel, the traditions of Avalon, the Merlin, and the Round Table, the calendric wizardry of the Maya, and the Venus teachings from Mesoamerica, the Jupiter teachings originating in China, and the Vedic lunar mansion traditions, the Babylonian and Sumerian sidereal zodiacs, the brilliant Hellenistic invention of the seasonal zodiac. The Neolithic peoples around the planet, some still today, honoring the sacred connection between the land and the sky. The Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, who created a time of 2,000 years of peace, the builders of Newgrange. My teachers that are not in human form, Mount Shasta, the Grandfather Rock at the Wonderland of Rocks in Joshua Tree, Mount Haleakala on Maui, the Fish Lake Valley, Hierophany, and the sacred landscapes around the planet, the astrosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and the esoteric astrology of DK in the Tibetan, both presaging the shamanic astrology paradigm, and particularly the archetypal visions of C.G. Jung and the cosmology of my mentor, Dane Rajar. For these and more we give thanks.
And without further ado, here is Daniel Giamario of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. Daniel, how in the heavens are you?
Hey, Brett. Good to be back on the air with you. It's been a good number of months since we've done this, and been looking forward to doing this for some time. So I'm of course, yeah, I'm talking to you all from our place outside of Metro Manila. So I'm over here in the Philippines right now. But the purpose of today, I think, is for us to discuss some of the things that occurred during my more recent 13-week road trip. One thing I learned about my life is that I'll never try to do at my age another 13-week road trip. And the final part of it was 12 days in Egypt for the first time. Actually, the road trip included going to Ireland for a short period of time. Again, then that event that Anya and I did with Robin Heath in Wales. And then we went over to see the crop circles, which showed up magically for us again around Avebury. And then after coming to the U.S. and seeing the total solar eclipse, which we had a fabulous experience of doing with a small group north of Redmond, right along the one of the gorges there that was just really pretty amazing. And then after that, we had an event in Portugal, of which I have some photos to share about that. And then following that, my wife and I, Lynn and I, went to Egypt for 12 days. And the majority of what I wanted to talk about during this time with you today, Brett, is about what happened in Egypt. Cool. And to give my take and account on the whole Egypt thing. And one of the things that that can be an adjunct to today's sharing here is the article that I just wrote in some detail about the experiences that will be shortly appear in a newsletter and will also be on my website. So that we'll make that available. We can have that be in the show notes, Brett, about the article that I wrote.
We'll put this up on YouTube, where there's already 8 of these further adventures of shamanic astrology, but many of you are witnessing this live on Facebook. This is our first time going that way, so please be patient if we have some technical glitches. And I'm sure this article of yours will be shared at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School page on Facebook. So if you're seeing this in the future and you're a Facebooker, head over and check out Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. We will put a link in the YouTube comments later once I post this to the school's page, so you can follow along and follow live videos like this. And the content is content all the time from you and from Kaylin and Eric and Tammy and many of the Shamanic Astrology fold. There was one other thing that came for me, but it quickly went away. So why don't you whisk us away?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, particularly for those that have not heard any of these further adventure shows with you and I before, is that we've tended to go back and forth between shows that are directly and specifically about astrology per se, you know, about chart analysis. And the last show we did was on the 144 storylines based on the house position of the nodes of the moon and things like that. We've had a couple other shows that were fully chart analysis based, and then we have a lot of these shows that are based on these further adventures, which is like these adventures and research that I do on a number of different subjects around the world, at different places. I take groups, and my long-lasting, ever since 1981, love of going to sacred sites, some that have human intervention and some that don't. In other words, whether it's a mountain or hierarchical crater or Mount Shasta, or just also the stone circles and the chambered cairns and the long barrows and the pyramids and so on. And I finally, after all these years, 41 countries and counting, finally had a chance to go to Egypt. And anyway, what happened for me there has really affected my, well, it hasn't changed my views, but it's amplified them in a lot of ways. And particularly with the themes that I brought up before in other shows about the Renaissance of the sacred feminine, the early history of humanity, the how in which what we've learned in our regular schooling and mainstream history is really not anywhere close to the whole story. But in particular, the theme that I've been developing over the years about what I call the Triple Aberration. This view that has just been increasing more and more every year is that we actually find ourselves on the planet not at a state of very high evolution, actually, but at a time period that's been a devolution from where human consciousness was at the time of the megalithic golden age and the Neolithic times and further back, when human beings were more Giamatic, cooperative, very limited warfare, cooperative, non-ranking type of a culture. And it's only the last 5,000 years or so that we've seen the change. And that change I would describe as the triple aberration, meaning number one, hierarchical patriarchy. Number two, patrilineal family descent, which is really fairly new on the planet. And then the third thing, which is kind of a fundamentalist version of monotheism. You know, we put those three things together, you get the predicament that we're in. And I'm going to illustrate some of this and how these views were amplified during this most recent Egypt trip.
And I'll add a link in the comments to a YouTube playlist for the 8 previous adventures, where we get into a lot of this material and get into some of the astrological transmissions, as Daniel mentioned, but also just trips around the world to sacred sites. I share this passion with Daniel, and I found that when we tap into some of these old sites, whether there was human construction or not, in that sacred space where the marriage of heaven and earth is celebrated, in a way we are tapping into the songs of this marriage and the story of the stars before the written word. Yes. And there's a purity there. And we're speaking of this triple aberration. Well, I should also mention just, and at this time as we are recording now, there's a triple conjunction, and it's such a powerful time to be speaking about this wisdom, right? Venus is applying it just from hours from now to her exterior, opposite side of the sun conjunction. So Earth, Sun, Venus, and all the way out to Pluto. And there's amazing things happening right now too, where Mars and Jupiter and Scorpio are casting a sextile to that triple conjunction. And, a sextile in the other way to the point where Venus and Mars last met in the 19th degree of Virgo on October 5th. So January 8th, 2018, where I sit now in Seattle, Washington, and January 9th in the Philippines. And I just wanted to throw that in because when we speak about this Capricorn archetype, the power of Pluto and the evolution and the compost, well, we're hearing a lot of the themes that are being transmitted today. And maybe, Daniel, just before we begin, you can tell us about the true essence of Capricorn.
Well, I personally think that the sign Capricorn, as well as many of our views about Saturn, has been usurped by the patriarchy. That our view of it is very short-sighted. That in fact I look more at Capricorn in this matriarchal sense as the wisdom of the feminine, the circle of grandmothers, the council of elders, the elder women, and plenty of men who work for them. So it's not just a sex thing here, but who are making the decisions for the benefit of the generations to follow, that practical kinds of things that will take the best from the past, honoring some of the ancient traditions, but being open to the things that really do work for the benefit of the 7 generations to follow. So to me, it's more of a feminine thing. It's not this patriarchy thing. That a great example of what I'm speaking of, about how cultural consciousness, a consensus reality can overwhelm how we actually think about things. When Galileo first looked at Saturn through his telescope, he wrote down in his journal, "Oh my God, the old man has a beard." Can you imagine anyone today who would first see the rings of Saturn and think of something like that? It was just such an ingrained view about it being a patriarch and judgmental and critical and so on. Capricorn gets a hugely bad rap. So just to summarize what I'm saying here, I'd rather look at Capricorn as a grandmother goat, or the circle of a council of elders that are making the decisions for the benefit of the planet. So, I mean, that's what I'm talking about here.
I love that. I feel Capricorn, where I see the Earth Taurus as the fruit and the flower of the tree that wants to be tasted and smelled and pollinated. I feel that Virgo, the leaf reaching for the light and doing the inner work that feeds the thing. Well, Capricorn is the trunk and the roots, reaching into this ancient, this deep wisdom. Yeah. And so
that it is actually very fitting that we're having this conversation at the point when Venus is right smack at the center point of the underworld on the other side of the sun, and Pluto, the time that Pluto is also maximum in the underworld on the other side of the sun. After we've passed through the other gate, of Saturn right behind the sun, right at the December solstice point. So like you can look at it and say that the Capricornian, the patriarchal version of Capricorn is being composted at this particular time, which is my favorite word to talk about an underworld or Plutonian process. Is when something gets composted. So let's envision it that way. But let's get on to Egypt.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, the magic of the Scorpio alignments too, taking us back to this tradition that, wasn't really written, was held in the mystery schools. And I think Pluto and the Scorpio sextiles from Mr. Mars and Jupiter have something to say on that side of things. To off to Kemet we go.
And Mars and Jupiter together. I've been watching it every morning in the morning sky here. And here at the latitude that I'm at, you also get to see that alignment where parallel here when you're down here the south is that the entire constellation of Centaurus, which originally represents Chiron. Can you imagine like an entire constellation allocated to Chiron? And there it is, aiming its lance or its thyrsus right at the Scorpion.
Yeah.
And which right above is where Mars is on the beeline for, just as when Mars and Jupiter have just gone through the scales. So it's as if Chiron, Centaurus is, is kind of pointing this out, but you won't see that up in the north, because it's no longer that visible in the northern hemispheres.
Yeah, I was fortunate to just take a trip to Fiji and then Australia and then Hawaii, and really got to connect to those stars. And I just wrote this piece for Organization for Professional Astrology that maybe I'll link here too. And I was meant to be writing about Mercury solely, but I started writing about the elemental shifts in this year and about the prophecy of Prometheus. And I was looking at this triple conjunction between Mercury and Saturn at galactic center and the galactic cross. And I noticed that Mercury in his retrograde dance moved from the tip of the arrow of the archer, right, the Sagittarian archer, and then to the tip of the spear. Yes. Really, we're kind of back towards the centaur. So these two heavenly centaurs, Mercury's really bringing this into view. And I really love that image of the centaur, who reminds us that we are earthling too, right? Not just these heavenly beings, but we are part horse, right?
Well, yeah, he's a half-breed on two different levels. He's mortal and immortal, and he's human and beast.
All right, so there's some of the astrology. Regardless, we as eminent astrologers cannot get away from the mysteries altogether. And let's go back to one of their most ancient and beautiful sources in Kemet. And I'm going to share the screen so we look at you alone, Daniel, as you bring us on your trip.
You want me to share screen now, right?
Yes, please. Anything first.
Yes. So we had the opportunity to stay in this little hotel. This is actually from our hotel window. And the reason we stayed at this one was because it's where Robert Bauval stayed for many years writing his books. This was his favorite place in order to do most of his research and writing. And I love Bauval's books about Egypt. I've learned really a lot from them, even learned a lot of got some clues about astrology from his books regarding things like the hierarchical rise of planets and Venus and so on, and even Mercury. But this was right from our window. And you can't go out there, unfortunately. I mean, you can go out there during the day. What?
Sorry to interrupt. Your screen share did not start. So I think there's another button you have to click.
Really?
Yep, so maybe exit screen share.
Uh-oh.
And then when you share screen again, there'll be another button you have to click in the lower right of that window, which I think is start share or something along those lines.
Well, now I'm not even seeing where it says share or not share.
Hold on, let me make sure we get you out of that place, and then I will bring us back in. All right. Okay, so try that again. So share screen at the bottom.
Oh, I have to go back here. Okay.
Yeah, and then it opens a window, and then there's another in the lower right. There's another button that says share screen there.
Got it. Okay. You have it now?
We do indeed.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the view from the window of our little hotel. And I was just saying, you cannot really go out there at night or anything, even though it's so close. They have everything barricaded and shut off. But boy, it's just right out the window. That was really a great start to our trip. And then it turns out, let's see. Oh yeah, here. Here's another. This is another shot from our hotel window. And this is actually me, taken by Lynn, of me coming out of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. They have this thing in Egypt where certain things are only open for, like every other year, every fourth or fifth year. And we did have the opportunity on this trip. It turned out the King's Chamber was available for tourists to go in. And I did have the opportunity to lie inside the sarcophagus, the initiation the sarcophagus, right in the middle of the king's chamber, and got to hear the acoustics. And just doing like some sounding from lying in the king's the chamber sarcophagus was really quite mind blowing. Never had experienced anything quite like it. If you go to Egypt, not every year are you going to be able to get into the king's chamber. So I felt really lucky about that. Here I am just standing just to get a sense of the size of the building blocks. This is like right out in front of the Great Pyramid. Okay, now following our time in Giza, we had the opportunity to go to a place that not too many people go to, which is Amarna, which is Akhenaten's, where he had built his capital at exactly the center of the of Egypt. I mean, there's a whole geomantic project associated with his locating the spot. There's very little left there, actually. But it was great going there because it has this awesome view above the Nile, and it's north of Luxor, so therefore, like the Nile cruises very seldom ever go by here. And Akhenaten was always my favorite of all the Egyptian pharaohs, and to be able to get there and to see the hieroglyphs that were on several of the tomb areas was fabulous. That was one of the highlights of the whole trip. Here's you have to kind of walk up a long way to get to it, and the tombs that remain with that marvelous iconography of the rays of the sun coming down and hitting Akhenaten were up from this area actually, and there's Lynn and me also standing there. We loved that visit to Amarna. Tel Al Amarna, also originally called Akhenaten, the city of Akhenaten. Akhenaten, for those of you who don't know, is the kind of the rebel pharaoh who kind of abolished the old religion and put in a sun worship, one God concept, and got rid of the kind of elevated women to a higher level, and but then ended up being written out of their history. They tried to make it to pretend like that he never existed, and when the old priesthood and the old gods came back. So it was great going there. Then, following our time in Amarna, we had a chance to go to a place, again, even less people get to go to, and that is the Siwa Oasis. And this was out by the Libyan border, right smack in the middle of the Sahara Desert. It took about a 10-hour drive to get there. Numerous military checkpoints. I can't tell you how many times our bags were searched. But by the time we get to the oasis, there's this huge body of water there. This is actually where Alexander the Great went to have a consultation with the Oracle of Amun there to find out whether he really was the next pharaoh, but also some say to try to find the Emerald Tablets and to look for Hermes' grave, which is allegedly where the Emerald Tablets were. So there's a lot of mythic stories about this area, but it's primarily a Berber area. They have a different language, although they have been Islamicized. They still have a completely different energy than the rest of the Egyptians. To go to Siwa was astounding. This is a place that has 200,000 date trees, 200,000 in this oasis, and about 30,000 olive trees. And this is just me in this inland lake right in the middle of the Sahara Desert. So it's the Siwa Oasis. There, another one of this, me sitting there in the oasis. Now, this next place that really had made an impression on me was the Philae Temple, and this is down in Upper Egypt. down in Upper Egypt, yes, at the Upper Nile. And this was the last temple where the sacred feminine was honored at all. It lasted several hundred years after Christianity took over there. And they had a wonderful light show that was actually recognizing Hathor and Isis in a really great way. A lot better than the light shows in Giza that were just like a celebration of pomposity and the mainstream story. So the sacred feminine really was felt in Philae. And that's me standing in front of one of the other temples. You can see a lot of the hieroglyphs there behind there. And now, this was really, in a sense, for me, the biggest highlight. We haven't gotten to the lowlights of the trip yet. My favorite of all the Egyptian goddesses is Seshet. And when I was there, I kept asking around, what about Seshet? What about Seshet? And even some of the guides would say, oh, she is not important. Well, I certainly beg to differ. Seshet actually was known before Thoth. She's considered to be the inventor of writing, while Thoth was just the teacher of it. And I found in the Temple of Luxor this on a wall that shows her magnificence. That's her writing, and that's the 7-pointed star above her head. And there's like stars and patterns of stars and constellations all over her body. And so originally she was a goddess in her own right, but then once Thoth came on the scene, they turned her first into a daughter and then into a wife of Thoth. And then soon after kind of gets written out of the whole thing. But I just love her so much, and that's why I invoke her in the Shamanic Astrology lineage as being one of the great sources. She was the one also that measured the temples. They would have to change the orientation of the temples over a period of time. They were all oriented toward the rising of Sirius, but that kept shifting due to precession. So every couple hundred of years, they would have to change the entrance point of the temples. And she was the one that had the measuring cord and the ability to know how to reorient the temples based on precession. And this is just one more image here of how big some of the Egyptian stuff actually is. And there's another one of us in front of the Sphinx, another one there. Some of the, how intricate the artwork and the carvings are. And I believe that's the last one of my slides here on this. So let's come off the slides for a moment, and I wanted to discuss what I thought the lowlights and what I really learned on this trip. And I guess I need to, oh yeah, exit. There we go. And
I can stop your screen share on my end, Daniel. So
okay,
we're back. Beautiful trip there.
Well, so the thing that came through so big time is that although I really love the Old Kingdom, and I love the way in which the original Egyptian stuff, we can speculate about this, about how it happened, because I think it is much older than most people think. But that at the early days, it really was a celebration of as above, so below, and what is the most magnificent things that human beings have ever created to be the mirror of heaven. But from the Middle Kingdom onward, to me, being in Egypt was an experience of utter, complete grandiosity to the level of obscenity. In fact, it really struck me in my heart when we were in the Nubian Museum down in Upper Egypt, where they had the translation of these hieroglyphs. And so many of them were the Egyptians bragging about how many Nubians they'd slaughtered that day. And then you actually see these huge statues, particularly Ramses II and Ramses III. I mean, in all honesty, reminded me of Donald Trump and American hegemony. It really bothered me. And of course, then when it hit me that if you really want to see the triple aberration on steroids, go to Egypt. Even the way the culture there is now, which is so heavily Islamicized. We had the opportunity when we're there to meet a lot of the local people, and their treatment of women is just beyond imagination. I mean, even the cosmopolitan, somewhat more educated male Egyptian guides, their attitude was the women shouldn't leave their homes. They shouldn't be educated. It doesn't matter if we have 3 or 4 wives. Just a complete subjugation of the sacred feminine there is it's just overwhelming. It broke my heart, and I'm certainly aware of the problems of fundamentalism everywhere. I mean, certainly there's fundamentalist Islam, fundamentalism in Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism. It just breaks my heart because the indigenous matrilineal soul of these people have been broken. It's my opinion. It's how I feel about it. But like the Nubians that were slaughtered by the Middle Kingdom, they were matrilineal originally. The Berbers were matrilineal originally. And to see how everything was blown up into a celebration of megalomaniac pharaohs, it made me feel, it solidified why it is that the Egyptian thing had been less interesting to me than some of the other places that I've gone to. But I'm just really glad that I got to see it with my own eyes and to feel into it. And I certainly am not trying to be just only critical of Islam here at all. I mean, because I've seen the same phenomena happen in other parts of the world with Christianity, where the indigenous soul has been stuffed out and squeezed out by monotheism and patriarchy. So now, a lot of people who go to Egypt are not going to have these experiences because we decided to do things off the grid, like go to Siwa and go to Amarna and so on. If you just do a Nile cruise, you'll basically be sheltered from a lot of this. It's certainly worth going, but do your own research and certainly don't believe the mainstream story about Egypt. So I mean, that's what. It just solidified my own feeling about the triple aberration, quite frankly, Brett.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear, like, because the Nile flows towards the south, that south was up in Egypt. And I mean, there's such a reversal that we're tuning into here and accessing when we tap our roots down into this old history and herstory that, it's difficult to be heard, and it wasn't recorded in written word. Long ago. Have you tuned into the work of Hakim Arion?
No, the people that I've been influenced by in regards to Egypt are Robert Duvall, and also she's to a certain extent Andrew Collins, but no, Robert Temple. And then all the different people who write together with Robert Duvall that have written a variety of books among different subjects regarding Egypt, and also Robert Schoch. Yeah, who's the one who just most recent. The book I can really recommend is called Origins of the Sphinx. The most recent thing by Schoch and Duvall. And their view, I very much buy into, having gone to Göbekli Tepe a few years ago. They basically feel that the Sphinx was essentially built around the same time as Göbekli Tepe. And then when the weather conditions changed, the Nile Delta was not really a place where people could be. It could be. It's like that the knowledge of the watchers and the knowledge of the elite carriers of knowledge from Central Asia that brought it into Göbekli Tepe, and then were involved with building the Sphinx. Then it actually went into the Orkneys, and it went into Scotland and Ireland and parts of England, and stayed there for a good 4,000 or 5,000 years, and then went back down to Egypt at the time of the building of the Great Pyramids. You know, the Giza Plateau.
Yeah.
That's the thing that makes the most sense to me right now.
Yeah, and Baval's done some amazing work on the stones out in the desert from long, long ago. I will add a link below to a YouTube presentation by Mr. Arian. My understand, I mean, his kind of public space was as a guide in Egypt when he was alive. He's passed away not too long ago, but that he was a keeper of the ancient mystery traditions. And his son, Yusuf, and his wife, Patricia, who's actually an American woman, they live out in Cairo, I believe. They do tours and stuff. They have a site called Chematology, where they're getting back into the old ways. And Yusuf brings people, and he plays Egyptian ney, you know, and he'll bring the sound healing alive through the resonance in the many different temples that are all tuned to different harmonies and geometries, as we know, or are beginning to know. So I'll post that here, and then I'll send that link to you, Daniel, because I think you'll love it. I mean, he speaks often about this matrilineal heritage from Kemet, from the land that we call Egypt now, where you'll usually see even Pharaoh with the left foot, the feminine side forward, and usually the queen's arm above the king, you know.
Right.
But they're doing some really cool work, and they bring out a lot of the people that you mentioned out on tours too. And I think next time you go back, the two of you would really get along, you and Yusuf.
Sounds great. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. The other the sense I get is that if you go further back, then you don't have this. But the thing was bothering me. But by the time you get to the Ramses the second and the third, then the whole thing is shifted. And to me, that era was like the big turning point, because the Ramses III, of course, is famous for having defeated the Sea Peoples. But who were the Sea Peoples? Well, they were the last attempt of the amalgamation of the different goddess-worshipping cultures, trying to keep their culture alive, and they almost succeeded in driving back the incursions until Ramses III destroyed them. So that was like the last attempt, and some say Odysseus was part of that also. That, you know, he was 10 years in captivity in Egypt. He was with the Sea Peoples in their attempt to drive back the patriarchy. The later patriarchal Greeks changed the whole story.
Well, you mentioned getting up to the Orkneys and to Wales.
Yeah.
I think you're going to take us on a trip there today as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that'll give us also the opportunity to talk about something that came up in our previous show, one of our previous shows, which is about the 5, 12, 13 triangle.
Yeah.
And I finally figured out how it works, what's really significant about it, without going totally overboard into really wonderful, but beyond the scope of most people, into metrology and, you know, sacred geometry. So let me try to go. Yeah. This is the book that I recommend big time.
Right. So this is The Lost Science of Measuring the Earth by Robin Heath and John Michel.
And Robin Heath was our guide on our Wales journey. So we got to hang out with him. In fact, let's look at some of the pictures, some of the photos from that. And then I'll give that quick little hit about the 5, 12, 13 triangle, which is really important, I think.
As you're bringing that up, I'll just say that to people that this encodes what's known as the silver fraction.
Yes, yes.
You know, there's a lot of challenge. This is another wonderful book I highly recommend. It's called The Mayan and Other Ancient Calendars, one of the wooden books by Jeff Stray, where he's looking into the difficulty of having a calendar that celebrates both lunations, the phases of the moon, and the tropical year, the sun, which you better do if you like things like food, right? And so looking at like the genius of the ancient Babylonian calendar, where there's 29 days in 1 month followed by 30 to honor, and their average 29 and a half, which is the average time of the lunar synodic cycle, new moon to new moon.
Yeah, the thing about that part of the world, when a part of the world I'm speaking of here would be England, Scotland, Ireland, the megalithic builders, the units of measure that Alexander Thom discerned, that created the understanding of the what's it called, the
megalithic yard and the megalithic.
Yes, megalithic yards. Thank you. That they were using the 29.5. Everything was based upon the synodic lunar cycle. They weren't doing their metrology from the 27.3. But we'll come back to that after we look at some of these shots. Okay.
Sure.
Oh, wait a minute. What am I doing?
Couple buttons, right? Yeah. So, folks, there's 12.37 lunations per year on average, and from that math,
I'm trying to get the. What do I do here, Brett? I do the share screen because I have it up. I thought I had it up there. Sorry.
There's two buttons you have to click, Daniel. So there's the share screen.
There we go.
That works perfect.
So there's this marvelous dolmen right on the coast, the furthest western part of Wales. And
Daniel, if you would, sorry to interrupt you, if you would hit that full screen button just right there. Yep.
Yes. So there's Robin there in the front, and this is our wonderful group that gathered with Robin for about 5 days in Pembrokeshire in Wales. This was like his favorite sweet little spot here that, and you'll see a couple other shots here. Can't go through. There's the dolmen, and there's Robin standing in front of it. And some of these are not really relevant. They're just shots of our trip. Here's the sweet little dolmen, which has built into it the 12, 5, 13 triangle there. You can see it, actually. We actually took a ruler and measured it. That's Robin and his wife there, and Anya and me there, and going through the entire Preseli magic, which the Wales area is like, according to Robin, and I think he's correct, it's like the prototype for Stonehenge, that it's where the stones come from and where the sacred geometry of this area that he's discerned is the same as the sacred geometry of Stonehenge. And these are many of the different alignments. It's not really it's a huge area of land where the alignments are exactly what Stonehenge is in miniature. Anyway, I can't go actually through all of these, but I wanted just to give a flavor of what our trip was like. Such a sweet and amazing spot. If you ever want to go and experience the magic of landscape where the goddess still lives, it's in Pembrokeshire in Wales. Such a fabulous place. I should have been more prepared here on this, because further ahead is all the crop circle stuff. So let's see, maybe we can just talk for a bit while I can try to move ahead to it so we don't waste the time here. I wish I was had greater facility on this. Yikes. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so the way to explain the 5, 12, 13 And it's the thing actually that has been in the foundation of our research in the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School from the very beginning, which you have alluded to here actually, which is how can you combine the lunar year or the lunar cycle and the solar cycle? It's essentially what has haunted the ancients about how to do that. And there's been numerous attempts to create a solution. Well, Robin believes that he's discovered an amazing solution that seems to be built into the metrology of that part of the world. In fact, even extending to Russia, extending to Egypt, extending to the measures that built the pyramids and so on. And if you take, if you have the 29.5 days, and you have 12 of them, and then you put a 13th onto it, then you have these silver fraction and this golden fraction. Right. The golden fraction is the time beyond the solar year. And it's pretty remarkable, the work he's done to show that actually so-called royal measures, you know, English measures, the foot and inch and so on, are directly related to the cosmology. I mean, it's even beyond just the relationship between the sun and the moon. On other levels, it goes into precession itself. But the basis of it is this silver fraction and golden fraction, which is how the lunation stretches, hits a point before the solar year and stretches beyond the end of the solar year.
Yeah, so let me just add a thing about the mathematics there, right? So there's this confusion about how many lunations there are a year. Like the Jose Arguelles kind of Mayan factor crew is having this argument that we need to shift to a more harmonic calendar of 13 months of 28 days, and then you add 5 intercalendary days. And I love the idea of getting to a more harmonic calendar, but that really doesn't honor nature because the moon does not 28. At 27.3 on average, returning from one star around into that star again. That's called the sidereal or of the star cycles. And then the lunation catching up to where the sun's moved from new moon to new moon, 29.53 days on average, the synodic cycle. Yes. And there are not 13 of those in a year. There are 12.37. But as Daniel was saying before, if you look at 12 lunations, and that computes to about 354 days. If you subtract that 354.367 days of 12 lunations, new moon to new moon, from the solar year of 365.24 days, you get about 11 days, right? Yeah. And if you divide the time of a lunation, 29.5, by that difference of around 11, you reach the silver fraction.
Which is also 7/19.
Right, yeah, 7/19 is the more beautiful way to express it, and as a fraction, it's about 0.368267, and clearly, I'm looking at a book, right, which is this lost science of measuring the Earth, and that this fraction is codified in one of these sacred Pythagorean triangles, as we learn in school, the 5, 12, 13 triangle, and not only is that triangle itself shown in the geometry of Stonehenge, right, so on kind of a micro level, in Stonehenge, you can draw this rectangle between the inner circle of stones and the outer post holes. But that there's a much larger meta 5, 12, 13 triangle. And you can tell us in a second, Daniel, about what the points of this 5, 12, 13 triangle are. Well, it's the silver fraction is coded when the hypotenuse is drawn, I believe, from Stonehenge to the midpoint of the 2 other points. And so Stonehenge is one of these points. What are the 2 other points, Daniel?
Well, where the actual stones themselves are from.
Right, and so the Bluestone site.
Yeah, and Lundy Island.
Mm-hmm.
So this basically the original geometry was in Pembrokeshire, and that is where the bluestones for Stonehenge come from. And so then the geometry was then miniaturized in Stonehenge itself, and it points back over to that particular area. And we had an opportunity when we were in Wales to walk each point of the 5, 12, 13 triangle in Pembrokeshire, in Wales, of which then is miniaturized in Stonehenge itself. And that's what we have. I have more photos on that of the different points, but it's actually too difficult to explain in this very more generalized presentation.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the comments for this great book, The Lost Science of Measuring the Earth by Robin Heath and John Michel. And I'll also add an article from Graham Hancock's site about how the 5, 12, 13 triangle is also codified in that so-called sarcophagus that you got to lay in the king's chamber.
Now that I did not know. Which book is that in?
This one, yeah, no, that one I think has come to me, I don't know, through some of this crew, Hancock and Bivol. And so I'll add a link to an article that people can refer to online about that. And I'll send that to you as well, Daniel.
That is so wild. That is so wild. You know, I'm thinking that we probably should have another show at some point just on the crop circle phenomena.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And because twice now we've had taken groups to Wiltshire in Avebury, right around Lammas, you know, right around Lunisad, and that's when these most remarkable crop circles have happened, and they've really come down when our group was there. And it might be fun to discuss that for us to go back and forth about what we think they are, what the situation is with them. It does relate to sacred geometry a great deal, but there's a much bigger story, and I'll be a little better prepared in having the exact right photographs for the different crop circles that we've taken our groups into, and to have it just only be about that. So rather than trying to jump ahead and work with that part of it right now, I do want to maybe, because it's a much easier thing to share, is to share about this remarkable stone circle, or this megalithic monument that featured in our ceremonies and our research at our most recent event that we did with the school. Actually, it was our cosmology course, over 6 days in Portugal. And there's this megalithic area there, and a stone. It's not really a circle; it's more than that. It's actually 1,000 years older than the ones in the British Isles. And so the whole thing is that this megalithic culture came up from the Mediterranean and went along Iberia, northern Africa, and along Iberia, the islands like Malta and Sardinia, and then went up the coast and reached Brittany. It was a tremendous iteration of the megalithic and Neolithic culture there. And then a little bit later, it makes it into Ireland. And in fact, Newgrange could be thought of as the most mature, or the culmination of those traditions. So it was really cool to be in Portugal and to see earlier versions of the same culture. We learned when we were in Portugal also about its ancient connection to the sacred feminine, their connection to the Grail. Portugal is associated with the Grail, the connection with the Knights Templars there, and the sort of the Neolithic underground there. Those that are into the old ways there believe that Portugal is going to lead the world back into a goddess and a feminine-oriented world. And so to be able to see and experience some of these old sites there was fabulous as part of the cosmology training. So let me try to get to that right now, if I can even remember how to do this stuff. Okay, this is something else that has the 5, 12, 13 triangle, but let's see if I can find this easy. Here we go. Now I need to do something more, I think, don't I?
We're looking at that now. I mean, I think it could get a little bit bigger, but it's good enough, Daniel. We can definitely see the photos on the screen here. And this is Portugal. Wow.
I'll start. This is going to the beginning now.
Okay.
So this is a place that has nearly 100 stones, and it's we did our fall equinox ceremony here, and we also did a graduation. One of the members of the school received her full certification here. We were there one evening to do the work. This place is just it's on an exact equinox east-west line, kind of high up on a hill, and it has an orientation like no other site I've ever been to. It's like a series. It's almost like it's a gathering. You know, different clans gather, and it's like certainly for the community, that's for sure. And then you have that one ceremonial stone in the middle. We just really loved this place. And these are just some other shots. This is nearby. It's one very large menhir standing stone, and that's one of the Templar areas. Many Templar areas where there's castles built from the 11th century in Portugal. But this site that I'm sharing with you, this is from 6000 BC, actually. So it really goes way back. It was really new to me to be able to actually experience and learn more about how these ancient traditions were actually in Portugal so far back. A huge organic community there. One of the things that's great about Portugal is that during their time of dictatorship there, they did not modernize. So actually there's more rural, more like unspoilt land and there than there is in any other country in Europe, which is very intriguing. That was one of the benefits of having a backward-looking dictatorship there. But now it's very progressive at this point in that country. Okay. So that's just a little taste of our Portugal trip. And anyway, in summary, the 13 weeks were demanding, amazing. Took me to so many different places I hadn't been before. There was that. You've probably done a show, haven't you, Brett, about your experience with the eclipse?
You know what? I really haven't. I did many different interviews and things, mostly with Astrology Hub during the time, but I'm still stunned by it. You know, we had a really wonderful retreat out in deep, 2-mile deep water sourced in this hot springs, the Trinity Hot Springs in Idaho. And yeah, I mean, it was just profound, right? So I had a little bit less of an eclipse than you did. I was further from the path of totality. We were in totality, but further from the direct path. But I mean, one thing about it, I think anyone who's seen a total solar eclipse knows you kind of become an instant junkie. So I'm already looking to where I'll go next. And you know, there's one that's going to go right through Karnak in I think 2027, and it's like a 6.5 minute total solar eclipse, Daniel. So I think we need to be looking ahead and bringing the team to Egypt. You know, there's one thing. Well,
that's actually, it's interesting to hear that, because I have one of my inspirations now in my 70th year to be able to make it to the next lunar standstill in 2025. So there's at Kallanish, for example, and we haven't done a show on the lunar standstills, have we?
Certainly not enough, and it's become, a topic of my primary study.
But to have a 6.5 minute eclipse going through Karnak, well, there's yet another thing to remain alive for, yes.
Absolutely. right? There's so much beauty on Earth. I'm really connecting to this idea that 13 weeks, which we hear is long, but as we're speaking about the 5, 12, 13, so maybe down to 12 or 5. But 13, you know, historically is known as this number of the goddess. And many will say that's because there's 13 moons. And while that's not necessarily true, as we've seen 12.37 in a year, moon does move on average 13 degrees of the zodiac, right? So moving through these average 13-degree lunar mansions, as they're called, 27.
Well, part of the things we do in our cosmology trainings is to try to get people to recognize that 12 and 13 are both the sacred numbers of the moon.
Yes.
And in fact, when we were talking about those numbers before, I had not been aware until I actually sat down and for the first time and did the multiplication, that 13 times 27.3 and 12 times 29.5 are like within a day. So you can also come up with something really similar to the silver fraction by doing it that way too.
Yeah, so the 12, 13, and then the 18, 19 when it gets to the moon, sun, and eclipses and metonic cycles. So that would be a really fun thing to talk about and to get into the lunar standstill. And nodes and bendings come into that tale. It's definitely one of my favorite investigations right now, for sure. I'll say this also about 13, that Venus tends to have 13 cycles in a particular sign. So as the pentacle, the Venus star, the synodic Venus star, retrogrades through the zodiac, on average 96 to 104 years, right, with 1 point in one sign, 104 years being a sacred Mayan number for Venus. Right. There's about 13 of those cycles as she's moving around. And so this number, along with Friday, especially the Friday the 13th, so demonized, this is part of the thing that we're tapping into, as we're trying to retrieve balance between the feminine and the masculine energies now.
But the fact that they're both tied into the moon is the thing that I'm, because, you know, you mentioned about Arguelles, about wanting to establish 13 times 28. Mm-hmm. Actually, there were some cultures in the Mediterranean who did that. You know, I mean, that wasn't his original idea to do that. However, this was just one of the many ways to synthesize, to integrate the solar and lunar numbers. But as you say, and I totally agree with this, it isn't real. that it's a made up thing. It's no different than having January 1 be New Year's. That it's made up. It's really not the cosmology at all. So to the fact that the ancient knowledge that somehow went into the building of all these stone circles and, you know, many different countries, into the original metrology, the original you know, the units of measure that built the pyramids and the stone circles and everything else, that is actually based upon the silver and the golden fraction.
Yeah, and those fractions, the one beautiful thing about that, I mean, yeah, it's moon, but when we're working with moon phases, that's moon sun, right? And it's not only moon sun, right? Because it's completely a product of the phase angle between the moon and the sun, the phase, moon, right? It's moon sun as seen from Earth. Mm-hmm. So it brings in these, you know, so-called big three of the astrological mysteries: the moon, the sun, and the rising sign, which is just a symbol of the angles in the house, which is Earth, right?
The other thing that's really intriguing in doing this historical and global research is how different parts of the world would emphasize one rather than the other, the synodic or the sidereal. For example, in Polynesia, in Hawaii, they were using the synodic, but in a very unique way. It's by actually having a meaning based on the actual shape of the moon, the visible shape of the moon. Mm-hmm. So there would be a name, you'd have a name based upon what the moon looked like on the day you were born. You know, so
30 of them, right? Every day.
Yes, yes. And then so you have the mysterious one between 29 and 30.
I found in my last trip to Hawaii, Daniel, I was just there. I found a couple of sites that I think work the standstill cycle. And it makes a lot of sense because the calendar is lunar, right? They're celebrating in many ways New Year's in a sense with Makaliki, right? So when Ma'ali'i, the Pleiades, have their acronychal rise at sunset, which in our time is early November.
Right.
But they're working with in many of the systems that I've tapped into, they're working with the new moon, the visible new moon, the crescent new moon, Diana's bow, after that time. And I'm just working with this more and more that, you know, so much of the sacred sites are keeping the days by looking at the sun's dance during the course of the year, north and south on the eastern sunrise and western sunset horizons. But you can do the same thing with the full moon, right? Because the full moon's rising opposite sunset. And if you track the full moon's dance, you're doing the same thing, but you're getting that additional movement of the
that's exactly what was being done by those people at Fish Lake Valley, that site. They were actually using the position of the sequence of full moons on the horizon to come up with the notches on their petroglyphs. But just to finish that other point, so then meanwhile you have the cultures like the lunar mansion traditions that are not using the synodic. They're using the sidereal. And
it's pure lunar.
The pure move, but the movement of the moon from one night to the next back to its starting point, which would be a star.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's this beauty because for me, my prayer is not just a shift from solar to lunar, you know, and back and forth. I mean, it feels to me like there's a significant wound in like the false masculine that is so prevalent in reality. And I'm really trying to empathically, right, and sympathetically for my own life's experience, tap into where was that original wound that's caused this craziness. Because ideally what we would love to see is, you know, a return of balance. And I think working with lunar phases and working with this lunar standstill, which again brings us to moon and sun. There's this thing that came in just yesterday, Daniel. I was in San Francisco and I was walking around downtown and looking at amazing sacred symbols. You know, my work in Washington, D.C. has really taught me to look up. And so a whole new world comes alive when you're in these cities and you see these, you know, different symbols around the buildings. And one that's very often shown, which is a solar worship thing, it's said is the clamshell, right? Because the shell itself, I shouldn't say the clamshell, but the shell, it's an image of sunrise or sunset. And so people often speak of this as solar worship. I was thinking, it looks like we're organizing a trip to Cyprus for Venus's heliacal rise in late October, early November 2018, where she will have her first heliacal rise in Libra in our time, right? And I was thinking it would be really cool to get a clamshell floating out in the waters off Cyprus where Aphrodite was said to be born. And I row back in the clamshell and get an image of Venus there. But I just realized the clamshell itself is the sun. So that idea of Venus riding the waves on the clamshell back to Earth, it is her heliacal rise on the rays.
Well, this dream that we both have of bringing it back into balance is the reason why I do the Renaissance of the Sacred Feminine trips, particularly to Ireland, where the Tuatha Dé Danann for 2,000 years maintained the balance and the peace by equally celebrating the sun and the moon and the entrance of the sun into the chambers, you know, at December solstice, and working with the moon and Venus and all of them together, being able to keep things in balance by honoring both equally and seeing masculine and feminine in both. And that's the thing that is also one of the things I've been trying to impress on our school. The moon is not feminine, the sun is not masculine. They're both. There's gods and goddesses of both the sun and the moon, which is one of the main ingredients of my new book, Origins of the Shamanic Astrology Paradigm. But,
and that's out, and I'll put a link for that book also in the comments here. And yeah, I just love that. You know, my time in Peru, there's all of these different, you know, lunar temples or silver temples and golden temples. And I've been meaning to ask you this, Daniel. I'm glad it's coming in right now while I've got you on the horn. So Calendus, which is one of your principal learning sites and one of the principal sites of the Shamanic Astrology paradigm and its birth, we know it tracks the lunar standstill cycle. So it does this great about 19-year cycle. It's really the nodal cycle, 18.6 years of the moon's dance, extending beyond the sun's reach on the horizons. But do they also have equinox and solstice alignments at Calendar?
Yeah. They got solar and lunar, but they're emphasizing at that site due to its latitude, the southern
the moon can walk the land.
Right. That's the reason. But it's a master site that has all of it.
And it's one of the transmissions that we have broadcast previously in these further adventures of shamanic astrology. So I posted the YouTube list for the previous 8 episodes in the comments section. So if you're feeling this, go check those out. And anything more from the Philippines, Captain?
Well, just one last thing, which is that I'm incredibly happy that here, where I'm living, we have that total lunar eclipse coming up, and it's in a very beautiful, convenient early evening time.
Yeah. For me, so I'm going to have to wake up before sunrise. We do in the west coast of the States, we see the total lunar eclipse. This is January 31st. So here in the States, some in the Midwest will see part of the total eclipse. On the West Coast, we will have the opportunity to see the total solar eclipse. Living in Seattle is a little bit dangerous to count on clear skies, so I think I'm going to head to another one of our sacred sites in Joshua Tree. Or I'm even playing with the idea of getting on a plane around 5 a.m. and watching from a little bit higher up in the sky. But yeah, I'm glad that we'll be able to see that that blood moon together from places on different sides of the earth.
Good. Well, great connecting in with you again. Stay tuned for future shows. We know of at least a few coming up on the lunar standstills, on crop circles, and any other kinds of things that always happen when you and I get together. So thanks for watching. Thank you, Brett, as always, for producing this for me, and I love it. So
yeah, my treat. I'm glad we could go live on Facebook today. It's a fun way to expand the stretch, and thank you so much, folks, for tuning in live, or sometime in the future, or perhaps even sometimes in the past, because time is just an illusion, and we're so much more than human. And these are the mysteries we're getting after. Daniel, thanks again so much, and thank you all for being here. For Daniel Giamario, this is Gemini Brett signing off. We will see you in space.
Mm-hmm.